Hi, my name is Jay Oza, and I'm here at the Middletown Public Library about to give a talk titled Time is Money, Communication is Wealth. We all know what time is money means, but today, communication is wealth. That could be either financial, social, political, technical, reputation. In order to develop this wealth, you have to communicate well. In this talk, I'm going to cover why it is so important to be an effective speaker today. What does it take to become an effective speaker? And how do you become an effective speaker? I hope you get a lot out of this talk and start doing it. If you have any questions or comments, please let me know. I hope you enjoy the talk. Thank you.
We are happy to have Jay Oza here this evening to give a talk titled Time is Money, Communication is Wealth. He has over 25 years of corporate experience in the software industry in technical, marketing, and sales roles, and 10 years of experience as a business and executive coach. Though he gave a lot of speeches at work, he wanted to get better. He learned about public speaking by becoming the lead mentor of the Coursera's MOOC course on public speaking, where he helps students all over the world. He evaluated close to 1,000 speeches. Lastly, he is the author of the book Winning Speech Moments. If you want to, you may put your name and email on the sign-up sheet so he can send you his speech, his checklist, the speech workbook, and the presentation he is giving this evening. So let's welcome Jay. He's back at Middletown Library for the second time.
Thanks, Sheila, for that wonderful introduction. My name is Jay Oza, and I'm going to be giving a talk titled Time is Money, Communication is Wealth. I'm really excited to be here this evening because I love talking about communication and public speaking specifically. So we all know that time is money. We say it all the time and we live it. But the one thing we don't often say is that communication is wealth. What does that mean? When you communicate well, you gain power, you gain influence, you gain respectability, you gain gravitas, and that leads to wealth, not only financial, but social, political, technical, and even reputation. So that's what I'm going to be talking about in this talk. Communication in general, but specifically talk about something that is much more important today, public speaking. Now, why public speaking? You know, with technology today, with smartphones and machine learning and artificial intelligence, we're becoming less human. So how do you deal with that? The only antidote to that is to become more human. And to become more human, we need to connect, engage, influence. And the only way to do that is by speaking to people, either one-on-one, one-to-few, or one-to-many. So before I continue, let me thank you all for attending this talk this evening. I know you had a lot of other things you could have done, but you took time to come here. That means a lot to me. Second, I want to thank Sheila Algaba and the Middletown Library for organizing this event. And lastly, I want to thank the taxpayers of Middletown for supporting this library so that we can have an event like this and create a stronger community. So before I get into the talk, let me kind of give you a personal story. In 1983, I was about 20, and I joined a company. About a month or so into my job, my boss comes to me, his name was Dave, said, Jay, you're going to be giving an engineering status report to the leadership team. They rotate that, and this was my turn to give the engineering status report. I said, wow, how difficult can that be? So I went and got all the information from other engineers, and I put it all together, and I went to the meeting. My name gets called. I am completely frozen. Not a single word is coming out of my mouth. I have no idea what's going on. But luckily, my colleague Chris was sitting next to me. He slowly took the paper that I had put together, all my notes, and he gave the engineering status report. And what happened here, the good news is that I did not get fired. That's because I was very good in writing software, especially real-time programming software. But the bad news is that I was not on a promotion track. My colleague Chris was. So that's when I learned how important public speaking is. And I didn't do anything about it for almost 10 years because I just kept on thinking that, hey, as long as I can write software, I don't have to really ever give a talk. But then one day, I was working at Bell Labs in Homedale, and I attended a Toastmasters Club meeting. And I saw these people who had fear of giving talks, but they still did it, and the group was very supportive. And I said, you know, I need to do this, because if I don't do it, then I'm always going to be coding for the rest of my life. So I started attending Toastmasters Club and did their program, the 10 speeches that you have to do to become a competent Toastmaster. But what it did was, it gave me confidence that I could do more than just code, stay in my cubicle, write code, and that's it. What it did was it opened up opportunities. I had the option of either rising through the technical track or on the sales track. And I chose to go on the sales track. So right away, after I became confident that I could actually talk to customers and I could give talks, I went into sales consulting, where I worked with the salesman and we would explain technology to customers. And then eventually, I went into sales so that I can talk to business leaders. But the point here is, which I learned kind of late, that speaking gave me confidence. It opened up opportunities. And today, speaking is becoming very important for a simple reason: technology. Technology is making us less human. We have our smartphones, we don't interact with people that much, and we're not connecting. So the only way to deal with this is to become more human. And there is no better way to become more human than to speak to people, one-on-one, one to few, and one to many. That is our key differentiator, because when you look around, machines are going to be able to do just about everything we're doing. But I doubt it's going to take a very long time, if ever, machines are going to be able to connect and communicate the way we can. So today, this is extremely important, that we not only develop this skill, but we got to master it. What I'm going to talk about here is, why do you need to become an effective speaker today? And then I'm going to talk about what makes somebody an effective speaker. And then I'm going to give you some real tips and techniques on how to become an effective speaker. These are tips and techniques that I use. So all of the stuff that I'm going to tell you, I do it. So in a way, this talk is sort of meta. It's speech about speech. Okay. So why become an effective speaker? The simple answer is attention. Today, whoever gets attention wins in just about any field, whether it's business, whether it's politics, you name it. We're living in an attention economy. Our economy, if you look at it, has started from agricultural, then we went to industrial, then knowledge, and what we have now is attention economy. It's all about attention. Getting attention. Think about it. Everything, television, people are trying to capture our attention. On internet, social media, people are trying to capture our attention. And whoever captures the attention of people, they usually do extremely well. They develop wealth. Communication is wealth for them. Okay? But still, as I pointed out, the most effective way to get people's undivided attention is speaking. Like I'm here giving a talk to you. you are paying attention. People say that today people's attention span is about 8 seconds, but not when you are talking to them and you are very coherent and you have a clear message delivered crisply and impactfully. People will listen. And that's what this talk is all about. How do you get people to listen? This whole thing about gaining attention, I understood it when Lee Iacocca was the CEO of Chrysler. If you remember that Chrysler was going to go bankrupt and they got bailed out under Jimmy Carter's administration so they can stay afloat. And typically, up to that time, we never saw a CEO going on television communicating with us, the people, about their products. I just never saw that happen till Lee Iacocca. Lee Iacocca did not stay in his ivory tower. He was the face of Chrysler. And he would come on and talk about the K cars and the minivans. And through his communication skills and advertisement, he's responsible for turning Chrysler around. And he turned it around in such a way that they were able to repay the loans 7 years before they were expected. And if you remember, in all his commercials, he would end with, if you can find a better car, buy it. That's pretty gutsy. He's basically telling us that, hey, I believe in my product. I'm the CEO and I believe in it. And if you think there's a better car out there, go buy it. And that made people think like, hey, maybe I should go and check out Chrysler cars. If the CEO believes in his product, I should at least go and check out the dealer and see what they got. And as it happened, people started buying these cars. And that's how the turnaround took place. But it all came down to Lee Iacocca gaining attention. Okay? This guy, we all know who he is. That's Warren Buffett. And Warren Buffett is 89 years old, but he gets on TV for getting attention. Attention is all about. And what Warren Buffett teaches me is that you're never too old to be one of the pioneers in this attention economy. At 89, he's on CNBC, Fox Business News, talking about different acquisitions Berkshire Hathaway is making. He is the face of Berkshire Hathaway. And one of the things that Warren Buffett, one of his quotes is, it says, one easy way to become worth 50% more than you are now, at least is to hone your communication skills. And I believe it. Warren believes it. And he's out there, the face of Berkshire Hathaway, at the age of 89. He's 40-some years younger than me. I hope I can do the same thing when I get to his age. And I think what it's doing is, and this is something you got to keep in mind, that when you communicate, when you get in front of people, it keeps you young. So it's not only good to get the message out, but it'll keep you young, because you got to think when you're communicating. So these two examples I just gave you were business related. But attention is not just business, as we've seen, it's also politics. This guy, we all know him. He's famous for two phrases. That's Arnold Schwarzenegger. I'll be back. Remember that? And that famous phrase from Terminator, hasta la vista, baby. And those two phrases, guess what it did? He had no experience in politics. He became a 2-term governor. Think about it. No experience in politics. He has these two famous phrases that has made him zillions of dollars. And he became the governor of California, the most important state in this country. But then we have our current president, Donald Trump, famous for just one phrase, you're fired. And guess what happens? He got so much attention. In 2016, we said, you're hired. And now he's the president of the United States. Again, attention. He knows how to capture people's attention. And I'm going to make a bold prediction at this point. I think she's the future president of the United States. She doesn't have a single phrase, but you know what she has? She has selfies. And selfies is going to make her the future president of the United States. And, you know, in this picture, you see, she's giving a speech at the White House. So who am I to say, bet against her? You know, this is how we're living in an attention economy. And who knows better how to get attention than Kim Kardashian? So now we know why it's important to become an effective speaker. In order to develop wealth, whatever wealth the way you define it, whether it's financial, political, social, technical, you have to gain attention. And there is no better way to gain attention than communication. The one thing I want to say before I move on to the next slide is this thing about communication. Because this speech is specifically about public speaking, but I just want to kind of give you an overview because communication has gotten very complicated. And the best way to understand how communication has evolved is to look at our political leaders from the beginning. So let's start with the beginning. Our founding fathers were great writers. I mean, you name it. John Adams, Thomas Jefferson, Alexander Hamilton, John Jay, James Madison. These were just amazing writers. What they wrote is what we live by today. The Declaration of Independence, the Constitution. That was the dominant mode of gaining attention, writing. Then you move forward, and suddenly you had railroads, and you can have leaders, political leaders can go from one town to another town, and the dominant mode of gaining attention was oratory, and nobody did it better than Abraham Lincoln. He was a master at oratory, and because he was a master at that, he gained attention. And because he gained attention, when he gave his famous speech at the Cooper Union University, people really started thinking that this guy is definitely could run for president. And he did. And he was everybody's second choice. And when other top choice started dropping out, he became everybody's first choice. And he got nominated, and he became the president. But he would have never became a president if he wasn't an outstanding speaker. What made Lincoln so amazing is that he could communicate well, whether it was one-on-one, one to few, and one to many. He was outstanding in all three areas. Then you move forward, and you get radio. And the president who really took advantage of radio was Franklin Delano Roosevelt. He used his fireside chats to comfort the nation with banking crisis, recession, the New Deals initiative, and the course of World War II. But radio is a lot different than like giving speech. It's a really like an intimate way of communicating. And what Roosevelt did was, and I couldn't believe it, he only, 80% of his speech were 1,000 words, that's it. There were 1,000 words, and he used 80% of his speech consisted of those 1,000 words, that's it. He never used any big words that people could not understand. And people really, really were paying attention to what Roosevelt was saying. And as a result, he gained attention, and that's why he was a 4-term president. Then you move, fast forward again, the television age, and there came John F. Kennedy. He was made for the TV age. He was telegenic, articulate. He was humorous. Nobody did it better than John F. Kennedy. And suddenly, you had to be very good in front of television. Then you move forward, and you have Ronald Reagan. Ronald Reagan, because he had a background in movie industry, stagecraft became extremely important. You remember this famous speech, Mr. Gorbachev, tear down that wall. The wall was behind him. He didn't go to some auditorium somewhere and saying, Mr. Gorbachev, tear down that wall in Berlin. He was right there. Stagecraft became very important. Then Bill Clinton comes along, and suddenly he had to be relatable. If you remember, Bill Clinton, very famous, he went on Arsenio Hall show, and he played saxophone. So suddenly, he had to be relatable. Anybody could relate to Bill Clinton. And he would go on MTV and answer questions like, do you wear boxers or briefs? No president had done that before. And now, today, we have Donald Trump. He's also revolutionizing communication based on performance and also how rapidly he communicates. He's constantly communicating. So what I'm saying here is that communication today is very complicated. You have to be good in writing. You have to be good in giving speeches. You have to be good on radio. Now today that would be podcast. On television, could be YouTube. But there is also stagecraft. Then there is being relatable and using social media and performance. So if you are a leader, if you are becoming an executive, it's not just one thing. Communication is now everything. But in this talk, I'm going to focus specifically on public speaking. Okay. So what makes one an effective speaker? These are the 5 things I came up with. The first thing is you are the message. When I get in front of you and give this talk, there's no separate message. Everything is it's a composite. The way I talk, the way I use my body language, the words that I use, the feeling that I create, that's all me. I am the message. It's not like there is a message that is separate from who I am. That's all in one. So whenever you are giving a speech, whether it's one-on-one, one-to-few, or one-to-many, you are the message. Keep that in mind, that no speech occurs without you. You want to do it. You have a message you want to get out there. But you have to be really authentic. You got to believe in your message. You're living the message. Because when you don't, people will see right through you. And you're not going to be credible. Second, once you have that, it's the audience. What does that mean? Sometimes when you're giving a speech, there could be attendees, but everybody may not be your audience. There could be audience of one, could be audience of few, or could be audience of many. This, right now, whenever we see somebody testifying before Congress, the person's audience, they say audience of one, that audience of one is not even there. It's usually the President of the United States. So sometimes you got to know who your audience is. Is it that one person who's not even there? Or are there few people that you're directly talking to? Or is it many? So when you see these politicians give a speech at their rallies, that would be audience of many. So you need to know who your audience really is. Is it one? Is it few? Or is it many? Once you know your audience, the next thing is you got to have an objective. What exactly is your objective? When I give my talk, I focus on 4 things. What do I want my audience to know? How do I want my audience to think? How do I want them to feel? And then what do I want them to do? So it's know, think, feel, do. That's what I'm trying to do when I'm giving a speech. And that could be whether you're speaking somebody one-on-one, one-to-few, or one-to-many. You want to focus on what is the thing that you want the audience to know, what do you want them to think, how do you want them to feel, and then what do you want them to do? And I think if you keep that simple, then you will resonate. Then comes the performance part. Now, speaking is all about performance. Unlike other things, when you are giving a speech, people want to see you perform. When you don't perform, people don't think you really even believe in what you're saying. So it's not good enough to know your content, because what happens in a lot of cases is that people just want to just dump information, thinking that that'll save the day. And they feel good, but here's the problem. When you're dumping information, you already know that. That's not the reason why you're giving a speech. You have to make the audience smarter. That's the purpose of giving a speech. And they're not going to even remember that much. What they will remember is your performance. I'll give you a perfect example on what performance can do. We just recently saw Robert Mueller testify. And he made it clear that he was not going to deviate from the Mueller report. And Mueller report was an outstanding report. I read it, and it's quite comprehensive. But it's a report at the end of the day. It's not something you would read and get excited. And when he testified, he would just answer questions related to that. He did not perform. And when he didn't perform, it didn't move the audience opinion in one way or the other. So when you don't perform, you can't move the needle. Today, we're all about performance. People want to see you perform. That's how the media is not going to show your entire speech on news or on radio or anywhere. They're just going to pick the part where you are performing. So performance is very important, whether you're an executive or whether you are anybody who's communicating. You've got to perform. And I like to say that performance is truth, quote-unquote truth. And the last thing is what makes somebody an effective speaker is practice. Now, we always hear the word practice, 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 but what does that even mean? To give a talk, there's a formula that I've come up with called 99-1. If you have 100 hours, you have to practice 99 hours for that 1 hour speech if you want to do a great job. That's how much practice is needed. When people don't practice that much, it's very hard for them to resonate. Everybody can give a talk, but you can immediately tell people who have practiced a lot. And giving a speech, in one sense, can be the easiest thing you do because you can read it, you can just wing it. But if you want to resonate, it requires a lot of work. Like this speech, I'm not sure I'm meeting this mark, but 99, but I'm definitely close to 50 because I want to do a good job. And that's what it takes. That public speaking is effort, and it requires a lot of effort if you want to do a great job. So at this point, we have covered why it's important to become an effective speaker, because you have to gain attention, and what it takes to become an effective speaker. You have to be the message. You got to know who your audience is. You got to have an objective, which is know, think, feel, do. Then you have to create a performance. And then you got to practice that till you can wake up at 3 a.m. and do it. Now we're going to go into the nitty-gritty stuff on how to become an effective speaker. What are some of the practices that you have to go through? And these are things that I do. So I'm not telling you anything that I'm not already doing. So before I go into that, there is something I need to explain. And when you are speaking, there are 3 different things that are in play. The visual, what you're seeing, and vocal, what you're hearing, the way I'm modulating my voice, whether it's loud, soft, fast, slow, you pay attention to. And then there are words. And there was this professor, his name was Mehrabian, and he came up with some formula, and he said that when you're processing a speech, the way you process it is like this, that 55% is visual, 35% is vocal, and only 7% words. And most people don't quite understand what that means. So the example that I use is, let's say you are at a showroom and you see a nice, sexy sports car. In the showroom, you're just looking at the body and you're impressed. That's just visual. But it doesn't do anything because the car is not moving or anything. Then you go outside and the car suddenly, they rev up the engine and you hear now, and now you got 2 parts. The car looks good and the engine sounds good, but the car is still not moving. In order for that car to move at a fast speed, it needs gas, high-octane gas. So the analogy is that when you're speaking, your words are gas. Without words, your speech is dead. It stops because you can't flow. The speech would not flow. Vocal is your engine. You hear the engine. And visual is the actual body. So that's how we process when somebody is giving a speech. We look at the body language, how the person is moving, Then we pay attention to the vocal. Are they speaking fast? Because we pick up things from that, from sound. We pick up things from how they're varying their voice. And then the words keeps the speech flowing. And that's very important to understand that, like when people say, what is the most important in a speech? It's all three. They're all integrated. If you don't have words, the speech stops. If you're not using your voice, nobody's hearing you. And if you don't use your body language, then people are not sure whether you're really into what you're saying. So think about that when you're giving a speech, you're integrating all three. But the way people process it is just this way. Visual, then comes vocal, and then comes words. So I just want to make it clear that you all understand this, because a lot of people don't quite understand it, and they think that if I just provide information, that'll save the day. And it doesn't. That's why you have to perform. There's a visual component, vocal, and the words. Words alone is not going to make your speech work. How do you make your speech interesting? Everybody wants to know, what do I do to make my speech interesting? The best way to do that is this: less is more. So you don't want to overload your audience with a lot of information, because they're not going to process it. If you ever walk out of a speech, you may, if lucky, remember 10%. And the longer it takes, you're going to forget everything. So the burden is on you to make sure that people remember something. And the way to do it is what I do is, you use less information, but then you elaborate it. And the best way to elaborate is you talk about your personal experience, because that's directly you. Remember we said you are the message? When you talk about your personal experience, you know it, you lived it. That's your experience. So I'll give you an example. I just gave a talk just about a week ago, and I was talking about packaging. That I said that when you are looking for a job, you have to be well packaged. But how do I bring that point home? So I came up with this example related to something that happened to me when my wife told me to go get some tomatoes. And I went to the store and I picked up these nicely saran wrapped tomatoes, four of them in there. And I was walking out, but I said, let me take a quick peek to see how much they cost. And it turned out it was $3.49. And I said, well, that's a little too much for tomatoes. I know tomatoes have gotten expensive, but $3.49 seems a little too high. But then next to it, there were vine-ripened tomatoes, and they were $1.49 a pound. And they looked like tomatoes. They were red. I couldn't tell the difference, except they weren't saran wrapped and they were not well packaged. So I just took that, and I put it in a plastic bag, and I brought it home, and my wife was happy. But it made me think how many times I had picked that packaged tomatoes and paid $3.49 without even thinking about it. So the point I was making through that personal example experience is that we all have to be packaged, because when you're well packaged, then you're not making the other person think too hard. So you see, that was my personal experience. And I can talk about it because I lived it. That's my experience. So that's one thing. That makes your speech interesting, because people want to know, oh, I understand packaging, but now how are you going to make me understand with something that's not related to career, but it's somewhat similar? There is an analogy there. The second one is you talk about experience of people you know. And here I'm going to talk about my son. He was working this summer at a swim and tennis club. And this was his first really paid job. And he got fired on the last day. And I'm like, how do you get fired on the last day of your job? He said, well, Dad, I had a band event and I forgot to tell the boss. I waited till the last day and called him up, said, I can't make it. I have to go to my band practice or something. And the boss, and he said to boss, if I can come the next day. And the boss said, no, that's it, you're done. So he was sad. And when he first told me, I was a little angry. I said, Hirsch, this was your first job. How do you get fired on the last day? So I said, look, there's a good news and bad news here. The bad news is that boss is not going to give you a reference. But the good news is you learned something very valuable. That every job, no matter whether you're a volunteer, getting minimum wage, you got to take it seriously. People are paying you money. You got to do a good job. You can't just say at the last moment, I can't show up because I got something else going on. So I said, let this be a valuable lesson, because if not, then you're going to become a big screw up in the next job. You can't let that happen. So I think he got the message. The third thing that I use that's pretty effective, that makes a speech interesting, is to talk about examples that people would know. And this could be like current events, could be a book that you read, but the one that I always tend to use is movies, because people seem to really understand things that they see in the movie. It's like memorable. And there are some movies that are famous for that. Like whenever you talk about a business, the movie that usually is good for that is Godfather movies. Godfather 1 or Godfather Part 2. And last year, I gave a talk right here, and I was talking about like inflection point, and when you reach a point where either good things are happening or bad things are happening. And there are signals and there are noises. So I said, okay, I gave that example of what happened with Intel. But I said, how do I bring that point home so that people really get it? So I picked an example from that movie Godfather Part 2. If you remember that scene where when Michael Corleone goes to Cuba and they're making an arrest of these rebels, and one of the rebels basically takes a grenade out and detonates it, and he takes the captain out with it. And then he goes to birthday party of Hyman Roth. And he makes he says to Hyman Roth, I saw something very interesting today. That a rebel, instead of being arrested, he took out a grenade and he detonated it. And he said that the rebels are not paid, but the military police are paid. At this point, Hyman Roth is getting really worried, like, Michael, where is this going? Here, I'm trying to make this deal here. And he asks Michael, so what does that tell you? And Michael says, they can win. So here, something interesting happened. There was a signal, and then there was a noise. Hyman Roth dismisses that. He said, these rebel activities in Cuba has been going on for a long time. Your father knows about it, too. We used to work together, and these things are going to go away. Don't worry about it. But that's not how Michael sees it. He sees it as a signal. There's something brewing here. And he decides not to invest in the hotel business in Cuba. And that was the good news, right? He didn't lose his money. Unfortunately, bad news for Michael Corleone was that he got pulled into Godfather Part 3, so it didn't work out for him in that way. So that's how I'm saying that you can make your speech interesting. That you make a point, then don't move to another point, elaborate it, either through a personal example or somebody you know, or something that other people would know, like a movie like Godfather or Jerry Maguire, you name it. There are always good examples you can take, because movies are done by professionals and they are impactful and they work. The second thing I want to point out is be careful about humor when it comes in public speaking. We all want to try to be funny, but here's the problem. When you are giving a speech, give a speech. Unless you're doing a comedy routine, then be funny. Don't try to be funny when you're giving a speech, because that's not what people are expecting. And when you do something that people are not expecting, they don't react well. Either they don't think it's funny, or they think it's too funny. And the problem when they think it's too funny is that you're going to trample on your message. And that's not a good thing. So I always tell people that if you want to be funny, leave it to comedians. That doesn't mean that you can't be interesting and people get a little chuckle, but you don't want to go out of your way and be funny when you're speaking. It doesn't work most of the time. Comedy is hard. And most of us are going to be speakers, not comedians. So keep that in mind, that given a choice, avoid humor, because it usually doesn't work, because we're not that funny as we think we are. These are some of the practices to become an effective speaker. And I'm not going to go through all. If you have any questions, I'll certainly address them. I'm not sure if you can see them. So these are things that I do. So if you're at this point saying, okay, I got this far, but what do I do? How do I become an effective speaker? The first thing you can do is start recording your voice and video. Today, that's not that difficult. I carry an audio recorder with me all the time. And I can record my speech or anything I want to, any thoughts or any ideas. I just turn it on and record it. It's captured. And I can even practice my opening, my transition, my ending. This is always in my pocket. They cost about $30. It's worth getting it. I like it separated. But then we have these smartphones. Instead of taking a selfie, hit video record and just talk for a few minutes and practice. So today, there are really no excuses not becoming a good speaker, because you need to record your voice so you can hear it. Most people don't even know what they sound like, and they definitely don't know what they look like when they're speaking. I mean, I'm getting this recorded right now so that I can go back and evaluate it, so that next time I'll say, oh, Jay, you got to really work on this part. The transitions were not that good. You are too fast here. You didn't make your points very clearly. You got to articulate things more better. And that's what you got to do. You got to constantly record it. This is something that we just have to do it all the time. This is not like a one-time, like, okay, I'm giving a speech, I'm going to practice now for a few hours, and then I'll show up. That doesn't work, because you're always communicating with people, whether it's one-on-one with strangers, because anything can create opportunities. Or you can communicate like I am, or you can communicate in front of a large audience. The one thing I want to point out about communication is, this is one skill that you can become good at without going to college. You don't need a PhD. You don't need to go to Ivy League school. You don't even need a certificate. This is one skill where if you do it every day, you're going to improve and become a good to great speaker. This applies to anybody. And most people don't do it. And today, as I pointed out, this is a necessity. It's not a nicety anymore. We have to learn how to connect, engage, influence, persuade. The best way to do that is one-on-one, one to few, one to many. So the other thing I want to point out here is one of the practices is that one right here, conversation. One of the best way to become an effective speaker is learn to converse with people. So what does that mean? When we talk to people, we always start with small talk. So like, if you're here, I would say, hey, this is a nice room to give a talk. Look at all these artwork here. That's contextual. We both are in the same room, and it's going to elicit a response. Yeah, I like that artwork. I like that painting. This is amazing. This is a really nice room. You feel really comfortable giving a talk here. It's a very pleasant room to give a talk and attend. That's small talk. Then I could move up to the mid-talk, as I call it, where I could say, since we're all in the New York metro area, and looks like the Yankees are doing extremely well, I can say, you know, looks like the Yankees may win the World Series this year. Now, that's not a small talk. That's a mid-talk, because I'm talking about events or something about a team, a sporting event, or movies. So I moved from small talk to mid-talk. And let's say you happen to know about sports, and we engage in a conversation about Yankees. And say, yeah, they had a rough year, but you know, they put it together, and now they're poised to possibly win the World Series. Then I can take it to big talk, where I can say, you know, baseball is not the same like it used to be because of Moneyball. So now I'm bringing something that's pretty big here. I'm talking about analytics, that how baseball has changed today because of data, that managers are not just making gut calls anymore. They're relying on data. And that's Moneyball, right? We all read the book and saw the movie with Brad Pitt and Jonah Hill. So you see what I did was, there's like a cadence there. You start with small talk, then you kind of probe and go into mid-talk, and since you're now talking about the Yankees, you go into and start talking about big talk, which is about analytics. And since it's baseball, you can segue into analytics because you haven't deviated from baseball. Now, the reason I'm pointing this out is that unless you are practicing this with other people, how would you know that you resonate with any thoughts or ideas that you have? So it's very important to be a good conversationalist. And if you can converse with people one-on-one, then you can converse with people when it's one to few and one to many. Your speech shouldn't sound like something that's different when you're talking to somebody one-on-one. It's a conversation. The difference is you're just going to speak louder. But at the end, when people in the audience should feel like you are actually having a conversation with them. That's what resonates. So that's something you have to practice. I practice this all the time. I go to park, I meet people, normally people have dogs, and I get into conversation. I'll compliment on their dogs, and then we'll talk about something else, and then we can move into something else, and that's how I get to practice. The other thing is, you should always analyze other people's talks. And today, that's easy. You just go on YouTube. There are so many outstanding talks on YouTube, TED Talks, TEDx Talks. These people put in unbelievable number of hours to give a 15 to 18-minute presentation. It's just amazing what they do, how much effort they put in for that 15, 18-minute talk they give, TED Talks. So there are already excellent examples out there. You can look at debates, these political debates that we're having. For somebody to be debating, they have to be excellent communicators. You've got to pick up things from them. How do they explain something complex in like 1 minute? Because that's what we'll be doing at work. When somebody asks you a question, you can't be rambling. You've got to be crisp, and you've got to be impactful. Otherwise, you're not going to resonate. So there are tons of examples out there that you got to analyze and saying what they're doing well and what can I pick up from them. You know, the bad thing also is that with YouTube, they've upped the game. Today, you can't be a bad speaker because people know what good speakers look and sound like. So today, you just can't afford to wing it because everybody knows who the great speakers are. They're all available. Not like the old days, you got to see it on TV. Now, everything is on YouTube. So if this speech is bad, well, guess what? It'll be on YouTube. If it's good, it'll be on YouTube. Everything is on YouTube now. The other thing I want to point out is this thing right here. Incremental versus heroic. You know, we all want to be a heroic public speakers. We all think like we could be like Martin Luther King and speaking in front of the Lincoln Memorial. Most likely, none of us are going to get to that level. That's heroic speaking. But he didn't get that heroic. That was not his first speech he ever gave. He had given 2,000 speeches before he gave that speech, I Have a Dream speech. Focus on incremental improvement. Improve little by little. Don't try to be heroic. Otherwise, what will happen is you're not going to make improvement. This thing takes time. So focus on incremental so you're not disappointed, because we all think that we can be a heroic speaker. At one day we can be, but not immediately. You have to give lots of speeches before you get that. To give you an example from golf, when I used to play golf, I used to get books by all the famous golfers, the top-notch golfers, Jack Nicklaus, Bobby Jones, Tom Watson, Greg Norman, Tiger Woods. These were like, major winners. These were like the Hall of Fame golfers. And I never broke 100. I'm like, why am I looking at Tiger Woods tips? I'm never going to play like Tiger Woods. He's won 15 majors. What is he going to teach me? I'm never going to be. He's been practicing since the age of 2. I can't even get out of a bunker. And I'm looking at Tiger Woods' tips on how to get out of a bunker. Never worked. That's when I realized I wasted so much money on golf books and golf contraption and all that. The last thing I want to point out here is this part. Speaking requires taking risks. Everybody wants to play it safe, which is fine, but speaking is a courageous act. When you get in front of people, you're putting yourself out there. You got to take some risks. Because if you're not taking risks, there's no reward. And today, you don't get too many opportunities. Like if you go for a job interview, I coach executives who go for job interviews, and I tell them, you have to stand out because you're in a competitive situation. If you're doing what everybody else is doing, then you're going to get what everybody else is getting. Rejection letter. So you need to figure out, how do you stand out when you're giving a speech, whether it's a job interview, a sales presentation, or in front of people. You have to think about taking some risks. Otherwise, it's not going to resonate. That's something that's given. You should be taking some risks. So there are quite a few here. If there are any questions, I can certainly address them. But you get the idea that this skill requires work. We all speak, so we think that because we speak with individuals, with other people, that we can give a talk. When you give a talk, there's a lot that goes into it. There's so much preparation required. Not only you have to know your stuff well, then you have to come up and craft a message. Then you have to turn that into a performance. All that requires a lot of work. Just because you know it doesn't mean that you're going to know it. Just because I know what I'm talking about doesn't mean that at the end of this talk, you're going to understand it the way I do. The burden is on me to make that happen. So keep that in mind. So at this point, you're saying, okay, what is the path to success? And what I'm showing here is that there is this knowing. That's what we're doing here. I'm relaying information, content. But that's not going to be enough. There is this thing that I call this gap, the know, think, feel gap. What is that? I know about this topic. I think about this topic. And I feel it. But you just came here. You may know a little bit about it or may know quite a bit about it. You are thinking about it and you may be feeling about it. But during the talk, I need to get you to where I am. And at some point, you will hit this and bell will go off. Ding! What that means is you get it. And the word for that is resonate. So when there is a know, think, feel gap, like I'm here because I'm giving the talk, and you're here. I have to get you up to the point where the bell rings. At that point, my speech is resonating with you. So that, if I've done my job correctly, then what I've done is I have really narrowed this gap that exists. What I know, what I think, what I feel, and what you end up knowing, thinking, and feeling. So that addresses the know, think, feel gap. But that doesn't mean anything unless you get into this gap right here, action. So this is doing. If you leave here, don't do anything, and you just know it, you think it, you feel it, but you're not doing it. So the action gap will still remain. I do this, as I showed in the earlier slide, all the practices that I engage in, and you're here, and nothing happens, then that gap will remain that way. So after the speech, you have to do something to reduce that gap. And it's not difficult, as I showed in the previous slide. You can record your voice with thoughts, ideas. You can even videotape it and just evaluate it. And incrementally, as I pointed out, it's incremental. You will improve. Okay? So then, once you're doing it, then you have to, so this is hardest, right? From knowing to doing is the hardest. Most people fail right here. This is where this gets broken. I give this talk all the time. Everybody nods. They know it. They feel it. They think it. But then they say, nothing happens. This is the hardest. But let's say you started doing it. Then you have to learn from it. That's harder. And if you're learning, then you have to be improving. And that's not that easy either. That's hard. And once you're improving, Then you're forming a habit, and now you're competing with yourself. Like, how do I get better? And once you're competing, then you become very obsessive, and then you start winning. So at this point, there is this other gap that comes in called achievement gap. So let's say you now came to this talk, you know it, you think it, you feel it, and you basically narrowed that gap that exists. Then you started doing something, the action gap. Then the thing you have to work on at some point, you have to reduce this achievement gap. So good things starts happening. And this could be people respect you more. You suddenly have influence. Suddenly you get power. You get a nice job. When you go to interviews, you're doing extremely well, the way you communicate. Suddenly you're achieving. Your gap of achievement is reduced, and you're starting to win. So these are the three gaps you have to think about. The path, the incremental path to success, that I just wanted to make sure you understand that. So now you understand that, this is what I think you should do. This is a good way to reduce that action gap. It's the 30-day challenge. And what this is something I've done. I can send you the link to my 30-day challenge. Every day, record something, any topic you like, 3-minute video. That's it, 3 minutes. And today that's not that difficult. Most of us have a smartphone, just hit record. And before you record, what I suggest you do is make a rough outline on what you want to say and 1 or 2 points, and then just start the recording. And don't do more than 3 takes, because you don't want to make it perfect. This is practice. And let's say you record something, you want to make some comment about some movie you saw, Downton Abbey or something. You just say, hey, I saw Downton Abbey, and here's what I thought about this movie. That's fine. You can pick any topic you want, but just record 3 minutes. And do this every day for 30 days. And if you do that for 30 days, now again, you can miss a day here or two, but then on weekends you can make up. But if you do that for 30 days, believe me, you're going to improve. You're going to get a lot better than you are right now. And this applies to anybody. But here's the problem. People don't do it. And it's only 3 minutes we're talking about. Just write an outline. So at the total number, let's say you took it seriously, at most you're going to spend an hour. You write a brief outline. Here's what I want, because you already thought about something. Write a brief outline saying, here's what I want to talk about. Record it. If you don't like it, record it again. Make some changes. If you don't like it, record it 1 more time. And that's it. You're done. Do it the next day. Do it the next day. Do it the next day. Do it for 30 days. Believe me, you're going to improve. It's not that difficult, but it's work. So another thing you can do is what I did. Once you record the video, to increase the stakes, put it on YouTube. People are always scared to put things on YouTube thinking like, oh my God, everybody's going to see it. Nobody sees it. I put things on YouTube and say, oh, you're going to get trolled and all kinds of people. Nobody ever sends me anything. I'm like, please send something to me so I know I exist. There are so many videos on YouTube. Nobody has time to look at your video. But what we'll do is that if you think that something you've recorded is good, then you can send it to people. You can then put a link on Twitter, and people will view it. That's how, like I said, you have to take risks. And if you're not taking risks, then you're not going to stand out. Okay? So this 30-day challenge, I want everybody to take it. This is not difficult, but it is work. Because if you want to improve, this is the best way to do it. So, Sheila, who was here, who introduced me, I wrote a letter. So I need a favor from you. But here I've done something interesting. This is just that you attended the talk, but this is the part I want to read. And what you want to do is this. So now that you've done the 30-day challenge and you're emboldened, just say, listen, I already drafted this for you. I was motivated by the talk such that I'm interested in giving a talk at the library. Would you be open to look at a proposal of a talk I have in mind that I believe will serve the community? There you go. You get on the calendar. Because if you don't get on the calendar, you're not going to take it seriously. So here's the thing. After this talk, take the 30-day challenge. And once you take the 30-day challenge, already start sending it to her. Send this email to her saying, hey, I'm motivated, I want to give a talk. And if you're planning to give a talk, let me know. I'll come and attend. I'll be in the audience, and you can even hire Michael here, and he'll videotape it, and then you can put it on YouTube. And who knows what opportunities that can bring to you. That's how it works. So at this point, I want to have closing thoughts. So there's a lot of stuff, because public speaking becomes kind of difficult because we think like, I just can't do it, this is too hard, that's it, I'm not going to do it. At the end, it comes down to two things. Be excited of being in front of people. It's contagious. When you're excited, people see it, that this guy really wants to be up there. And that's what they want to see. And the second thing is, be clear on what you're communicating. That's all you need to do. All these other things are there, like stories and humor and all that. You don't need to do any of that. At the end, if people don't understand what you just communicated, it's worth nothing. Be excited of talking to people, conversing, giving a talk, and be clear. That's all you need to do. I call it like smash mouth football. It's simple. You just run right through. People know exactly what you're going to do, and they do it well. That's what communication is at the end of the day. All these other things that people use, this technique and that technique, no, it's all about being into it and being clear. And if you do that, you'll be better than 99% of the speakers out there. Because a lot of times, I have no idea what they're talking about. And I'm not sure they're even into what they're talking about. And lastly, I want to say something interesting. We always hear people say that you're not a good listener, right? We hear that all the time. You know, you're just not a good listener. And I always used to think, like, I could become a good listener only if I had another ear. But that's not going to happen. But then I realized, perhaps it's not my fault. Maybe the person who's speaking may not be a good talker. So the burden really is on good talkers. The burden is on us to talk well so that other people would want to listen. So I want to thank you for listening. Not only you are outstanding listener, but you are a marathon listener. So thank you for attending, and at this point I'll open it up for Q&A. When you are working on a speech, the best thing to do is first just do a brainstorming. Just think about all the thoughts you have about the topic you want to talk about. So the first thing I do is get hold of the content. What exactly is the content out there? Then, once you have a good grasp of the content, then you want to work on what is the part in the content that I want to communicate. Everything cannot be communicated. This is not like you're going to regurgitate like the Mueller report. You have to cherry pick. What is the one thing that people out there really you want point to get across? So you have to make decisions. That's a judgment you have to use. That's based on whether you understand the audience. So once you understand the audience, you have to make those decisions. Okay, what is the item that I need to pick here that will resonate with the audience? Once you do that, then you need to work on what is the message that I want to convey. Because if you don't have a message, then people are not going to understand what is the main thing you're trying to get across. So once you got good grasp of the content, picking what are the main things I want to get across, then you come up with a message. Once you have those two, and I cover that in my book actually, the most difficult part is that's when most people don't even have a message when they're speaking. They just understand their content. Then it's a performance. How do I take all that and turn it into a performance? By performance means that there is that consistency between your visual, your vocal, and the words. That has to be integrated, and that's part of performance. So when I'm practicing, I will give a talk, and I will sometimes record it, and I will view it without the audio to see what the body language is telling me. Was it consistent? Is the body language good? or it's like very awkward. So I will view this video after it's done, after Michael edits it, and I'll be able to see. And sometimes they say that using gestures makes your speech much more exciting for people. They think you're into it. So when people say, like, no, don't use too many gestures, according to research, they found that the speeches that people really liked were the ones where the speakers used a lot of gestures. It was like amazing number. Like sometimes I couldn't believe it because a lot of times when you're speaking, you don't realize what you're doing. But you do need to watch your recording and pick out these things, because if it's bothering you, it's going to bother the audience, and it could hurt your message. People have little tics and things like and all these things. We all have that, but you have to work on it to remove it as best as you can. Sometimes you just can't remove them. So in a nutshell, it's the content. You got to know what you want to say. You got to be on top of your content. Then come up with a message, and then craft a performance. And if you put it all together, then your speech is going to resonate. And then it's all practice. The more you do it, the better you become at it. And the 30-day challenge, you can actually do that. Okay? Any other questions? You got to motivate yourself to doing it. And a lot of people wait till the end, or they just never want to practice. But there are so many ways you can practice, right? You can talk to individuals. I mean, you don't need to actually get in front of people, because actually one thing I forgot to mention in my talk is today there's no such thing as private speaking. It's all public, right? Because anybody can videotape you anytime. But there is a difference. So what we have today is good speaking and bad speaking. And we have to become a good speaker, whether it's talking to individuals one-on-one, or talking like this in front of few people, or getting in front and talking to many. There's no such thing as public speaking. It's good speaking and bad speaking. And good speaking requires work. Because at the end, you've got to have an objective when you get in front of people. What are you trying to do? Like my objective here is get the information, the message out, and then get it out to people who can view it on YouTube. And that's how it works. The more you do it, the more comfortable you become. But one thing about speaking that is different is that it's not like you can have one speech. I mean, there are people who do that. They'll have one speech and they'll just go from one place to another and give it. Today, I don't think that works, because you can watch somebody's speech on YouTube, and you do need to customize it for the audience. Because if you give a speech that the audience cannot relate to, then they're wondering that this guy doesn't really know us. And one of the things the audience is always looking for is, does this guy really understand who I am? And that requires a lot of work. Like I have a speech coming up in about several weeks, and I need to find out. It's going to be a bunch of students, but I need to find out exactly what they want to get out of my speech. And if I get that information, then I'm going to resonate. But if I just show up, and that means that I have to customize some of my examples so that they start getting it. The main thing I tell people that I'm coaching is, as I pointed out, is to be clear. Once you have the clarity part taken care of, then you can try to be more creative. And being creative means that what are the parts do you want to bring in your speech that will enhance clarity? So is it going to be a story? But what kind of story? Because sometimes stories can backfire. So you want to be careful, because nowadays there's a vogue out, telling stories like in vogue right now, that if you're not telling stories, you're not resonating. But one thing you have to remember about stories, that stories are not real. There's no way to verify them. You can't check anybody's stories. How do I know that your story is real? In my opinion, stories work when people know you. Like if I come in here, I can tell some kind of stories, anecdotes and stuff. But if I start just talking about stories after stories, it's not going to work if you don't know me. Now, I'll tell you a perfect person who gave a very good speech, Steve Jobs, when he gave his commencement address at Stanford, which is considered a classic. It's a very simple talk. He just says, I want to talk about three things. He said, I want to talk about connecting the dots, love and loss, and death. And what he does is he tells personal stories for each one. And then he concludes with, stay hungry, stay foolish. It's a very simple construct of the speech. It works. But that would only work with Steve Jobs, because everybody knows Steve Jobs. They don't want to hear talk about some technical topics. They want to know about his stories. Like, hey, what makes you Steve Jobs? And that's what he did. And that's why that Stanford commencement address that he gave in 2004 is considered one of the best commencement address ever given. There is another talk. So these are examples that you can learn from, and they're on YouTube. The other one I want to point out is this talk, a TED Talk given by a Harvard professor named Amy Cuddy. That's considered one of the top, it gets one of the number of views on YouTube, is that talk by Amy Cuddy. And if you view that talk, like the first 2/3 of it is just research on how your nonverbals affect your outlook, mental outlook. And then she talks about how it affects the two hormones, testosterone and cortisol. Okay? That's just the knowing part. This is what she wants the audience to know, the research. So that's what she's doing in the first 2/3. Then she gets into the feeling part. So she's making you know and think about these scientific things. Then she gets into her personal story about how she had an accident and how it affected her life. Suddenly you're drawn in. And then she tells you what you have to do so that you can gain confidence. And that is that power pose that you have to do before. And it's something that people do. Say, do that for 2 minutes before any stressful activity. So suddenly your nonverbal is going to affect your mind with the hormones. And then she ends it with, you fake it till you become it. And it's a very effective talk. So when it comes to these techniques, the best thing to do is see what the other great speakers are doing. And I pick up things from them. And let's face it, public speaking is not something that was invented yesterday. People have been trying to get this right since Aristotle. Aristotle was the first one to write about public speaking. And all we've been doing is just copying from Aristotle and kind of coming up with our own perspective. I mean, all the stuff that I talked about, Aristotle wrote about this more than 2,000 years ago. All we're doing is we're just taking it and applying it to the modern age. But that part hasn't changed. So, as far as picking up techniques are concerned, just try different things and see what works, what you're comfortable with. And that's what I'm saying when I said take risks. Many people are not willing to take risks. Should I use a story? The only way you're going to find out is by doing it. And once you do it and you feel comfortable, do it again. Do something else. Tell an anecdote. Tell something from a movies. So you got to keep experimenting. Speaking, in a sense, is a creative thing. When you get in front of people, you are basically out there. You're putting yourself out there. And you got to enjoy what you're doing. And you have to realize that it's not always going to work. That's the way it goes. There are going to be mistakes you're going to make. And you just have to live with it, saying, no speech is ever perfect. A perfect speech doesn't resonate. People want to see, they want to connect. If somebody sounds perfect and robotic, you're not going to connect with that person. So when you get in front of people, don't beat yourself up if something doesn't come out right. That's it, I'm stopping, that's it, I'm going to do it again. I'm never going to speak to that person. No, that's not what it's about. Become more human. You are going to make mistakes. Correct it. Say, I didn't say that right. Let me say it again. And people will like that. This is not about perfection. This is about connection. And if you connect, that's all it's all about. Then you'll have clarity and you will have achieved your objective. Okay, so if anybody needs to get any kind of coaching on job interviews or giving a sales presentation or giving a talk in front of an audience, large audience, you can contact me at my email or my phone number, and let's discuss and see if I can be of any help to you. Well, anyway, thank you all for attending, and practice this and take advantage of getting in front of people and giving talks. That's the only way it's going to work. That's the only way you're going to get better. So good luck. Thank you.